signals hit her brain like a hook through the ear and didn't let go. Anna pressed her palm flat against the metal wall of the transport and focused on breathing. The hull vibrated with re-entry burn, a bone-deep shudder that she could feel in her back teeth. Through the narrow observation slit, she watched the planet below resolve from a blur of brown and gray into something that looked, from up here, almost peaceful. Rolling hills, flat plains, a thin silver vein of water she'd later learn was a river the Veth had no name for, because the Veth didn't name things they considered temporary. That included them. "We're descending," Kat said from across the hold. She had her arms crossed over her chest, chin up, watching the other 5 occupants, like she was cataloging threats and deciding which ones could wait. 2 weeks in a transport together had stripped away the last of the social performance. Nobody pretended to be comfortable with anyone else anymore, in case no one checked the window. "We all check the window," Dev said. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the cargo webbing, turning a flat piece of metal over and over between his fingers. Something he'd pulled from a loose panel on day 4, kept like a worry stone. He had a way of sitting very still that made you think he wasn't paying attention, and then he'd say something that proved he'd been paying attention to everything. "We've been checking it for about 6 hours. Mia hadn't moved from her seat in 3. She had one hand pressed to her temple the way she'd been doing for the last 2 days, eyes half closed, and Anna had started to suspect the gesture wasn't a headache so much as something she was trying to keep inside. Jin stood at the far end of the hold with his hands in his pockets, watching Mia, saying nothing. He'd said almost nothing for the entire trip. Back at the processing facility, Anna had initially read him as hostile, the silence, the way he never smiled. But somewhere around day 8, she'd revised that to something closer to careful. Jin chose his words like he chose his ground. He wasn't going to plant his feet somewhere that couldn't hold him. And there was Anna herself, she supposed, reflected faintly in the observation slit glass. 29 years old, unremarkable face, a narrow scar along her jaw from a fall she'd taken at age 12 when she'd been running from something and stopped watching where her feet were. She'd been doing a version of that ever since. Running, not watching her feet, they'd all been running from something. That was, she supposed, why they were here. The classification was the same for all of them, cognitively atypical, which was the current language for what previous generations had called gifted, or cursed, or just plain weird. Anomalous neural architecture, enhanced sensory processing, brains that didn't fire the way standard brains fired. The Veth census 3 years ago had flagged them all in different cities, different circumstances. The relocation notices had arrived the same week. Remote assignment. Voluntary compliance strongly encouraged, compensation to follow. Voluntary. Anna had wanted to laugh when she'd read that word. The Veth had been administering Earth's population for 11 years. They knew what voluntary meant to a species that had given up its orbital defense grid as part of the Accord. It meant you could technically say no, and you could technically watch what happened to you afterward, and you could technically regret it. She had not said no. The transport hit turbulence and the hold lurched sideways. Kat reached up and grabbed a ceiling strap without looking. The motion automatic. Dev's metal piece went skittering across the floor and he watched it go without chasing it. Mia's hand pressed harder against her temple. "Something's broadcasting," Mia said. It was the first thing she'd said in hours. Everyone looked at her. "I don't know what it is," she said, quieter. "It's not language. It's like standing next to a speaker that's playing a frequency you can't hear but you can feel in your chest. Whatever's down there is broadcasting." "How long have you been feeling it?" Anna asked. Mia considered the question like the answer mattered. 6 hours. Kat let go of the ceiling strap. "Since we started descending." "Yes." Dev found his piece of metal. He didn't pick it up. "And you waited until now to mention this." "I was deciding if I was imagining it. And I'm not." The settlement was a cluster of prefabricated modules at the edge of a wide, flat plain, surrounded by a perimeter wall that was clearly designed to keep things out rather than people in. The Veth handlers, 2 of them, neutral gray carapace, the ridge structures along their upper skulls that indicated administrative caste, met them on the landing pad and delivered briefing in that precise almost musical Veth standard that always sounded to Anna like someone very carefully reciting a document rather than talking. The facility was a research installation. They were the subjects. The specific nature of the research would be shared with them on a needs basis. Their quarters were in Module 7. Perimeter wall was not a restriction on their movement, but the plane beyond it was mapped as hazardous, and they were advised not to cross outer markers until cleared. Their dietary requirements had been pre-filed and would be accommodated. They had questions. One of the handlers tilted its skull ridge at an angle Anna had learned meant polite dismissal rather than engagement. Your adaptation period will be variable. You will be assessed at intervals. For now, please proceed to your quarters. That was the briefing. Dev waited until the handlers had retreated inside the main module before he said quietly, "Subjects." "I heard it," Kat said. "They didn't call us researchers. They didn't call us consultants or specialists or participants. They said subjects. Dev. I'm just noting the language." "We noted it," Jin said, speaking for what might have been the 5th time since they'd left Earth. "We all noted it." Anna was staring at the plain beyond the perimeter wall. Brown grass, gray sky, a line of low hills at the horizon so far away they looked painted on. Somewhere in that direction the thin silver river ran. And somewhere in the frequency below hearing, something that Mia had been feeling for 6 hours was still broadcasting. She wondered, not for the first time, if the people who had sent them here knew what they were sending them toward. Or if the Veth handlers themselves knew. She thought, looking at the careful way the handlers had positioned themselves during the briefing. Slightly behind, angled to observe, never between the humans and the open landing pad. That maybe they didn't. That maybe nobody here, including them, knew what was on this planet, and that possibility was either very comforting or very much the opposite. She decided not to decide yet. The headache started on the 3rd day for Anna and the 4th for Kat. Mia had already been living with them for a week. Dev got his on day 5. He sat very still in the common area for about 4 hours with his hands flat on his thighs. Breathing with the careful deliberateness of someone who had decided pain was a variable to be managed, and Jin, characteristically, said nothing about his except that Anna started noticing the way he pressed 2 fingers just below his right temple, when he thought no one was. The Veth researchers, there were 3 of them in addition to the handlers, monitored them with a precision that felt like being watched through a microscope. Every meal was catalogued. Every rest cycle was logged. Anna found small sensors adhered to the doorframe of her quarters, to the underside of the common table, to the perimeter wall posts. She didn't remove them. She photographed each one with the small camera on her personal device, made notes on their placement and orientation, and added the notes to a file she titled, "Because she had a sense of humor, despite everything, voluntary." On the 6th day, she woke from a dream she couldn't remember with the absolute conviction that someone had just said her name. Not her first name. Not a name at all. Something more fundamental. Whatever she was when language was stripped away, the specific frequency of a self. She sat up in the dark and listened. Nothing. She lay back down and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep again until morning. Kat found her at the perimeter wall before breakfast, staring at the plane. "Mia says the broadcasting is getting louder," Kat said without preamble. She came to stand beside Anna, arms crossed, looking out at the same view, the hills in the distance, the gray sky beginning to lighten at the edge. She says it feels like a question. What kind of question? She doesn't know. She says it feels like being asked to describe a color to someone who's never seen colors. And you're the one who's never seen them. She says it keeps almost resolving into something she can understand, and then... Kat made a gesture with one hand. Dissolving. "I heard my name last night," Anna said. Or something that wasn't my name but meant the same thing. Kat was quiet for a moment. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and came out with a piece of hard candy she'd been hoarding since the transport. The synthetic kind the Veth produced that tasted almost, but not quite like something real, and put it in her mouth and turned it over with her tongue, thinking, "They're going to want a report," she said. "The handlers? The researchers? Whoever's running this, they're waiting for something to happen to us. I think something's starting to happen to us. That's not necessarily bad. I didn't say it was bad. I said it's starting. She looked sideways at Anna. That's a different thing. Anna thought about her name, the thing that wasn't her name, said in the dark by a voice that wasn't a voice. She thought about the 6 of them crammed into a transport for 2 weeks. 6 people who'd been running from different things, who'd been flagged by an alien census for the particular shape of their strange brains, deposited on a planet at the edge of mapped space, watched, cataloged, assessed. "How do you think they found us?" she asked. "Whatever's broadcasting." Kat took the candy out of her mouth, looked at it, put it back. "I think we found each other," she said finally. "Or we were pointed at each other. Or something that was looking for both of us arranged for us to be in the same place." She shrugged. It was not as casual a gesture on Kat as it would have been on anyone else. Same result. It came to Anna first, fully, on the 9th night. She was sitting cross-legged on her bunk, with her eyes open, not trying to sleep, just existing in the dark. And she felt it arrive the way you feel weather arriving before you can see it. A pressure change in the air, a shift in what the world was doing around you. Something turned its attention toward her. It wasn't threatening. That was the thing she would try to describe later, badly, because language was the wrong instrument for it. It wasn't threatening. It was enormous. It was a mind. She understood that at some level below thought, the way you understand heat, as a concept before your skin registers temperature, but a mind with a geometry she had no framework for. Vast and still and extraordinarily patient, and looking at her with something that translated, imperfectly, as curiosity, she thought, a part of herself that still had language. "Who are you?" And something that was not language but carried meaning like a current, carries a stone, answered. "That is the wrong question," she thought. "What are you?" Wrong again. The patience in the answer was not condescending. It was genuinely waiting. She thought, after a while, "What do you want?" The answer to that one took longer, assembled itself from pieces that were not words, images, sensations, something that might have been memory, and when it resolved into something she could hold, it was a single concept, simple and strange. Growth, not hers specifically, not theirs, something larger. Something that started with them and went somewhere she couldn't yet see. She sat in the dark and held that word and felt the enormous patience on the other side of the contact waiting, and she thought, okay, that's a start. By the time she walked into the common area the next morning, the others already knew. Not because she'd told them. She hadn't told anyone. She'd sat on her bunk until the gray light came through the window, turning it over, deciding how to hold it, and then she'd gotten dressed and gone to make coffee from the mediocre synthesized supply, and found 4 other people already sitting around the table with cups in their hands, and the specific expression of people who had been awake for a while. Mia looked like she'd been crying, not from distress but from the kind of overwhelm that comes from something too large passing through a space too small. Jin had both hands around his cup and was staring into it with the focused look of someone mapping new territory. Dev had his piece of metal in his hand again, turning it but slower than usual, the rhythm of thinking rather than distraction. "Kat." Anna sat down, just looked at her and said, "Growth." Anna nodded. "That's what I got too," Kat said. "That one word. The thing that word is a shadow of." It's not hostile," Mia said. "I need to say that first. Whatever it is, it's not hostile. It's not human either," Dev said. "Not an objection, a fact to be placed on the table." "No," Jin agreed. "Not even close." They were quiet for a moment. The settlement made its small sounds around them. The hum of the environmental system. The faint, far-off movement of the Veth researchers, beginning their day in the module across the compound. Anna thought about the handlers and their sensors, and their careful neutral briefings, and she thought about the fact that 6 people with anomalously wired brains had all made contact, separately, in the same night, something they had no category for. "They know," she said. "The Veth. They know something's here and they don't know what it is. Or they know what it is and they don't know how to reach it. That's why we're here. We're the instrument. We're the antenna," Kat corrected. "Same thing." Dev stopped turning his metal piece. "So what do? We could report it," Mia said. "Tell the researchers. Be cooperative subjects." She said the last 2 words carefully, putting the same emphasis Dev had put on subjects a week ago. "We could," Anna said. "We could figure out what it is first. Before we hand it to them. That is not the same thing as being cooperative, Jhin said. No, Anna agreed. It's not. Dev put his metal piece on the table. It made a small, deliberate sound. Then we'd better figure it out fast. They're going to notice whatever happened last night in our biometrics. They've got sensors on everything. He paused. Everything they know to look for. That distinction. Anna picked it up and turned it the way Dev turned his metal, examining it. What do you mean? I mean, Dev said, whatever this contact is, whatever it does, whatever it changes in us, it's not something they measured before it started. So they have no baseline for what it looks like when it's happening. They know something changed. They don't know what. Window, Kat said. Window, Dev confirmed. Anna looked at the door to the compound. At the perimeter wall, visible through the common area's single long window, the plain beyond, and the hills and the sky. How many days until the next scheduled assessment, she asked. 4, Mia said. Then, we have 4 days to understand what we're talking to. Understanding, it turned out, was both simpler and harder than they expected. The simpler part, it was patient. Whatever was broadcasting from somewhere in or under, or adjacent to this planet, they never solved the question of its physical location, and Anna came to suspect location was the wrong concept entirely, that it existed somewhere that didn't map to coordinates. It was willing to wait, willing to repeat, willing to approach from new angles when a given angle failed to transmit. It had been trying to make contact with something for what felt, in the impressions it conveyed, like an extremely long time. They were not the first attempt. They were the first that had worked. The harder part, it wasn't trying to communicate so much as it was trying to open a door. And opening a door was different from having a conversation. A conversation assumed you were the same kind of thing, standing on the same ground, using the same medium. Opening a door assumed there was a barrier, and that on the other side was something that didn't exist yet, and that the act of opening it changed both sides. Mia was the first to articulate what it was actually doing to them. She sat in the common area on day 2 of their 4-day window, with a cup of cold coffee she'd stopped drinking, and said, "It's not putting something into us. It's removing something that was limiting what we could already do." Like a switch, Dev said. Like. You know that phenomenon where a synapse fires, and the signal degrades because of interference in the surrounding tissue? Part of what sleep does is clear that interference so the signal can travel clean the next day. It's like that. But for whatever this is, she touched her temple, the gesture she'd been making since the transport. It's been there the whole time, the capability. We were built with it. Something in the environment was suppressing it. The Veth, Anna said. Or just Earth. Something about Earth's electromagnetic environment. Distance, Jhin said. We're not in Earth's field anymore. Or it knows how to reach through it now that it's found us, Kat said. Because it's been looking. They all sat with that for a moment. Either way, Dev said carefully, the capability was ours first, not theirs.
Not the Veths.
Ours. Anna heard what he wasn't saying. She heard it very clearly. Right, she said. Ours first. By the 3rd day, they were sleeping in 2-hour rotations and keeping the contact going in overlapping shifts. And Anna had filled 40 pages of notes in a notebook she kept under her mattresses. Not because she thought the Veth sensors couldn't find it there, but because putting it somewhere, deliberate, was a way of claiming it. An act of ownership. We are the ones keeping records here. She'd also started to feel the others. Not hear them. It wasn't that organized. But feel them the way you can feel other bodies in a dark room. The displacement of air. Sense of presence. That attention had a quality of precision to it. A specific, careful weight. Mia's was wide, peripheral, taking in everything at once and trying to hold it all. Kat's was like a knife, narrow, directed, cutting exactly to the point. Jhin surprised her. He felt, in that dark room of the mind, vast, like there was more of him than the exterior suggested. She thought he'd probably known that for a long time. She thought it was probably part of why he was so careful with his words. On the 3rd night, when she touched the contact again and felt the enormous patient presence on the other side, she asked, not in language, but in the new medium, the one that was opening up below language like a continent below water. She asked what it needed them to do, and the answer was not what she expected. It didn't need them to do anything. What it was offering, she realized, sitting with it, turning it. What it had been offering from the very beginning, what growth meant, was not a mission or a directive or a transaction. It was not the Veth's kind of relationship, which was administration, exchange, a ledger that always had to balance. It was offering them the thing that had been suppressed and asking only that they decide what to do with it now that it was unsuppressed. The rest, it was saying, is yours. She came out of the contact and sat in the dark for a long time. Then she went and knocked quietly on Dev's door. He opened it immediately. He hadn't been sleeping. "It's not going to tell us what to do," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "I didn't think it would. The Veth are going to want to use this. Whatever we've become. However this works. They're going to want to study it and categorize it and put it in a ledger. Yes. And the contact, whatever's out there, it won't stop them. It's already given us the only thing it has to give." Dev leaned against his doorframe. He'd been holding his metal piece, and he looked down at it now, turned it once, put it in his pocket. "So the question is what we do with it?" "Yes." "Fourth assessment." "Yes." He looked up at her with an expression that was not a smile exactly, but was the precursor to one, a decision being made that he thought might turn out to be the right one. "You have a plan. I have a starting point," she said, "which isn't the same thing." "Good enough," he said. "Tell the others." They told the others. The plan, the starting point, was straightforward in its structure, complicated in its execution, and premised on a fact that Anna had been sitting with for 3 days. The Veth's sensors were looking for biological changes, neural activity spikes, hormone fluctuations, changes in eye movement, and micro-expression. What they were not looking for, because they didn't know to look for it, was the space between people. The contact had opened something. What it had opened wasn't just individual, wasn't just each of them turning on a switch in their own skull. It was relational. It was the 6 of them as a network, each different, each approaching it differently, and that difference wasn't a weakness. It was exactly the thing the contact couldn't have found in a homogeneous group. The Veth, with their rigid caste hierarchies, and their census classifications, and their neat administrative categories, had sent 6 human outliers to one place, and accidentally created the exact configuration that this contact had been searching for. They'd been trying to solve for human strangeness. They'd assembled the answer. "What we do," Anna said, sitting with the 5 of them in the common area, 2 hours before the morning the handlers would come for the assessment, "is let the Veth study us, cooperate. We are the most cooperative subjects they have ever had the pleasure of monitoring." Dev raised an eyebrow. "We let them take their measurements and," Anna continued. "We let them write their reports. And what those reports will tell their supervisors, and whatever council reviews the findings, and whatever policy body sits above all of them, what those reports will say is that the 6 humans they sent here demonstrated anomalous neural activity consistent with enhanced cognition, and that the enhancement is highly individual and highly complex and would require extensive additional study to characterize. All of which is true," Mia said. "All of which is true. Because what they won't see, what they don't have sensors for, is this." She spread her hands across the table. A gesture that was also something else, something in the new medium, and she felt the others respond to it. Felt them reach toward each other in that dark room they'd been sharing, that space below language. They'll study us as individual specimens. They'll try to catalog the components. They will never look at the space between us, because they don't know the space is where it lives. And while they study the components, the network keeps growing. "Growing toward what?" Jin asked. It was the right question. She'd been waiting for him to ask it. "I don't know yet," she said. "That's the honest answer. Whatever the contact showed each of us individually, that was one piece. What we've been doing in the last 3 days, sharing it, feeling each other in it, that's something else. That's bigger, and it's ours." She looked around the table. Nobody gave it to us. The Veth didn't build it. The contact just cleared the path. We walked it together. The silence after that was not empty. Kat turned her cup in her hands. She had a way of being still that radiated activity, thought moving at speed behind the exterior. "If this spreads," she said, "if it's not just us, if the configuration that made us work is something that exists in other groups of humans, then the Veth have a problem," Dev said. "Then humanity has a future," Anna said. That's different from the same thing, but it's not unrelated. Dev picked up his metal piece one more time, turned it, set it in the center of the table, left it there. 4 hours until assessment, he said. We should practice being cooperative. The assessment was thorough, careful, and missed everything that mattered. The senior researcher, one of the 3 Veth who had been observing them since arrival, more vocal than the others, with a crest pattern that indicated scientific rather than administrative rank, conducted the measurements with evident interest and wrote steadily in its notation system throughout. Anna answered every question fully and truthfully and watched the researcher absorb the answers with the particular concentration of a mind fitting data to a pre-existing theory. The theory was approximately correct in its components. It was wrong in its architecture. At one point, the researcher asked, "Do you perceive any difference in your relationship to the other subjects?" Anna considered this. She was sitting across from it in the examination room, and she could feel, at the edge of her awareness, the others in their own examinations in adjacent rooms. Dev's careful precision, Kat's knife focus, Mia's wide peripheral attention, Jin's quiet vastness. Something warm she recognized as all of them together, watching out for each other without coordination, without planning, just present. "I feel like I know them better," she said. "Shared experience creates connection. That seems predictable for the conditions." The researcher noted this. "And do you perceive any change in your individual cognition? Any enhanced sensory processing, unusual pattern recognition, precognitive episodes?" "I've had some very vivid dreams," she said. "And I've been sleeping better than I expected, given the circumstances." Both of these were also true. The researcher thanked her, noted something final, and moved on. They sent their reports 3 days later. Anna never saw them, but Dev had gotten very good at reading the settlement's internal communication, patterns from the small sensor data he'd been quietly accumulating, and his read was detailed, interested, and flagged for follow-up assessment. The Veth were intrigued. They were planning to continue the study. "Good, let them continue," Mia, sitting at the perimeter wall in the early evening with Aina, watching the sky do something that was technically not a sunset, but involved clouds and light in a way that suggested the concept, said quietly, "It's still there, the contact. I thought after the assessment it might feel less like they'd blocked it somehow. But it's stronger." "They can't block what they can't see," Anna said. "They'll learn, eventually." Eventually. Anna watched the not quite sunset, but by then, Mia nodded slowly, by then. There was the kind of silence that isn't absence of sound so much as presence of something that doesn't need words. Anna had been living in it for days now. She'd found she liked it. "The contact," Mia said. "The thing out there, do you think it knows does it know what we're doing? The game we're playing with the Veth?" Anna thought about the vast patient things she'd touched in the dark on the 9th night, the thing that had offered growth, and then stepped back and said, "The rest is yours." She thought about patience on a scale that made the Veth's 11 years of administration look like an afternoon. "I think it always knew," she said. "I think it knew what we'd choose before we did. That's why it waited for us specifically. 6 outliers. 6 humans who already knew how to run from something and not get caught." She smiled a little at the not quite sunset. "Turns out that's a useful skill. It spread the way significant things spread, slowly and then all at once. They were on the planet for 8 months total before the Veth recalled them, citing inconclusive data and a need for modified study parameters. By then, the 6 of them had spent those months in what appeared, to any sensor or observer, to be the ordinary rhythms of a monitored research subject group: eating, sleeping, exercising, submitting to assessment, cooperating fully. They read, they exercised. They played cards for 3 hours some evenings in the common area, badly with more arguing than the game warranted. And the Veth researchers noted this behavior as evidence of social cohesion under stress, which was technically accurate. What the sensors didn't record was that the contact grew, that each of them had, in their particular way, developed a fluency in the thing that had been opened in them. Mia's wide peripheral attention had begun to reach extraordinary distances, touching other minds across the planet and then farther. Jin's vast interior had become a space where information arrived and organized itself with canny precision. Dev had discovered that his precision could interface with the Veth's own communications systems in ways that left no trace. Kat had gotten very quiet and very accurate in ways that didn't require any special ability to explain but were useful. And Anna had gotten good at the space between people. She'd gotten good at finding the configuration, the specific combination of different minds with different approaches, the arrangement that worked, the thing the contact had been searching for. And she'd gotten good at building it, at looking at a group of humans and seeing what they could become when they stopped being separate and became a network. On the transport home, the 6 of them sat in the hold where they'd traveled out. Same positions, almost, same vibration in the hull, same observation slit showing the planet receding below. Dev had his metal piece in his pocket. Kat was chewing synthetic candy. Mia looked calmer than Anna had ever seen her. Jin sat with his hands easy in his lap, watching nothing in particular, present in a way that filled the space around him. "What happens now?" Dev asked. The same question he'd asked in the settlement on the first morning, the one nobody had answered definitively. "Now," Anna said, "we go home." "Home's still the same," Kat said. "The Accord, the census, the Veth." "Yes," Anna agreed. "We're not the same." "No," Kat looked at her sideways. "And that matters." "It matters," Jin said quietly. "Because we're not the only ones. Are we?" He wasn't asking. He'd understood what Mia had understood, what they'd all understood. The configuration was rare but not unique. Somewhere on Earth, in other cities, in other ordinary lives, there were other people with anomalously wired brains who'd been flagged by an alien census for reasons those people didn't yet understand. People who'd been running from their own particular things and not watching their feet. People who, if they were ever placed in the same room with a frequency broadcasting below hearing, would respond the same way. "No," Anna said. "We're not the only ones." She felt the 5 of them in the dark room of the mind, present, steady, the network alive and growing and belonging entirely to them. She felt the patience of the thing that had given them this, waiting somewhere behind, its work finished, the door open, the rest genuinely theirs to choose. And she thought about what grew through an open door when nobody was watching. She thought it was going to be very interesting. The transport climbed toward the orbital transfer point and the planet fell away below them, brown and gray and peaceful looking from this distance, and somewhere in or under, or adjacent to it, something vast and patient and done with its work, held still and waited for what came next the way weather waits, not choosing, not directing, just being present for whatever the world decided to do with what it had been given. Anna leaned her head back against the hull. She closed her eyes. She felt all of them. Dev's precision, Kat's focus, Mia's wide net, Jin's quiet ocean, and something that was all of them together. Something that was growing faster now, that it had space and direction, and 6 stubborn human minds that had survived this particular form of being, studied and catalogued and administered, and had emerged from it with something no Veth census was ever going to find the right column for. Not power. That was the wrong word for it. Power was the Veth's category. Power was administered, exchanged, held in ledgers. This was something else. This was people who had been told what they were. Outliers, anomalies, subjects. Looking at each other and deciding, quietly and collectively, and without making any announcement about it, to be something that had never been in any ledger before. The hull vibrated with re-entry in reverse, the push of leaving, the opening of space, and Anna felt the planet recede and the distance grow, and the contact thin to something like a thread, still there, still warm, the longest thread imaginable, stretching back to whatever patient thing had cleared. Path through a forest and then stood aside. She thought, "Thank you." The thread pulsed once, gently, with something that translated as, "Now go." She went. They all went. Home to a planet that didn't yet know what was coming back to it. Home to 11 years of accord and administration and census, and careful Veth hands maintaining a very organized, very comprehensive system that had never, in 11 years, thought to look for the space between people. Home to other humans who were different in ways they'd been told were problems, who had been running from things and not watching their feet, who were waiting for something they didn't have a name for yet. The thread held across all the distance. It would hold further than that. Anna was fairly certain now of that. She thought of Dev saying, "The capability was ours first." She thought, That was probably the most important thing anyone had said on this entire trip. The stars came out around the transport as the planetary atmosphere fell away, clean and cold and numerous as everything that had not yet been decided. And Anna, 29 years old, unremarkable face, narrow scar along her jaw from a fall she'd taken running, opened her eyes and looked at them and thought, well then, let's see.